discover the amazing journey of a rancher who unexpectedly married 3 young Apache women. Jake stood amidst the endless stretch of dry earth that constituted his family ranch, gazing at the cranium of his father's old barn, sagging under the weight of memory, loss, and expectation. The landscape around him was both a breathtaking tableau of rugged beauty and a landscape of simmering dread. Each sun-soaked day bore the crushing heaviness of bills that piled high, as thick as the dust motes drifting through the golden evening light. The ranch, once a beacon of pride, now loomed over him like a mournful ghost, pressing down on his shoulders as the shimmer of the sun melted into the horizon. Today should have felt no different, working cattle, fixing fences, battling the heat. But as Jake forced his tired legs to move, he found himself confronted with an unsettling truth. He was losing the fight. The whispers from townsfolk filled his ears, echoing the uncertain future that lay before him. They said he was too stubborn to let go, clinging to a legacy that had turned to ash. Panic tightened around his chest, while waves of frustration coiled inside him like a snake ready to strike. What would it mean to let go, to abandon the one thing his father had built with blood, sweat, and tears? His thoughts spiraled and twisted at the edges of his mind when laughter erupted nearby, jolting him from his reverie. He turned sharply, and there they were, 3 young Apache women, vibrant and alive against the barren backdrop, tossing jokes and teasing each other as they floated gracefully around the cattle. It was surreal, the contrast of their joy against his own weighty despair. He wrestled with a gnawing discomfort that sprang from the prejudices ingrained in him, yet he couldn't deny the warmth their laughter ignited within him. It felt like a flickering light illuminating a path shrouded in darkness. He hesitated, unsure if he should approach. The women, Sophia, Talia, and Ellen, embodied everything his upbringing warned against, but as the days rolled into weeks, they bridged the chasm of solitude he'd felt for so long. Their stories of family, of honoring roots, resonated, prodding at something dormant in his heart. Each shared moment beneath the expansive Arizona sky transformed the weight of the ranch into a canvas of possibility. But comfort often came laced with pain. The oppressive murmurings in town grew louder. Accusations and whispers of betrayal laced with suspicion followed him like a shadow. Doubt gnawed at him. Could he stand before the community that raised him and choose to honor these new connections? Or was the safety of his childhood beliefs worth the crushing isolation their disapproval promised? With each dig from old acquaintances, his resolve flickered. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. As the tensions escalated, every glance from the townspeople turned into daggers, every whisper a stab of anxiety that drew blood. A town meeting was on the horizon, and Jake's mind thrashed against the chaos of conflicting desires. He needed to protect those women, to defend their right to belong, but doing so could strip his own identity bare before a crowd that cherished its prejudice. The weight of his choices felt relentless, as if he was trapped beneath the barn's rotting beams, suffocating and desperate for air. In that fraught silence before the storm, Jake made a decision. He would speak. But would he choose acceptance, safety, or the chance to embrace a love he never knew existed? The weight rested heavily on his heart, and as the town loomed ahead, he prepared to confront not just their judgment, but the parts of himself he feared to claim. Would he emerge a man redefined or fold beneath the relentless pressure? The horizon blurred with uncertainty, inviting him to step forward into a future that was both daunting and alive with possibility. Jake stood at the edge of the town hall, the wooden structure a stark reminder that every heartbeat in his chest echoed the townsfolk's scorn and suspicion. The bruised sky loomed overhead as if urging him to turn back, to retreat to the safety of the ranch. Yet, it was the laughter of Sophia, Talia, and Hélène that peeled away his hesitation. Each giggle they shared ignited embers of courage deep within him. Here were women who defied expectations and carried their history with pride. As people gathered in groups, Jake's stomach knotted. Was he truly prepared to face this storm, The fear gnawed at him. His hands trembled as he wiped the sweat from his brow, the sunlight glaring down, intensifying the moment. Each conversation he overheard was another nail in the coffin of his resolve. Whispers of betrayal pierced the warm air. "He thinks he can change things," one man scoffed, his words seeping into Jake's skin like poison. Yet, as the tension built, a realization struck Jake. He was not here merely to defend them. He was here to reclaim himself. The ranch was not just a crumbling facade of his father's legacy. It was a canvas upon which he could paint his new truth. He was becoming the man he had overlooked, one capable of love and acceptance. With each breath, he could feel the chains of conformity loosening their grip. When the meeting officially commenced, the mood shifted palpably. The town elder, a man steeped in tradition, called for attention. "Today, we discuss what it means to be a part of this community," he declared, his voice deep and resonant. Jake watched the expressions on the faces around him, a mixture of curiosity and outrage. It was a stark reflection of his own internal struggle. As discussions spiraled into disagreements, Jake felt his opportunity wane. He didn't want to interrupt. His gut twisted at the thought of raising his voice. Yet the thought of Sophia watching him from the corner, her warm gaze both encouraging and searching, pressed upon him like the weight of the sun. It was now or never. With an unexpected surge of defiance, Jake stood up, suddenly buoyed by a newfound sense of purpose. Voices quieted, skeptical eyes shifting toward him. "I have something to say," he began, his voice steady despite the quivering in his legs. "As ranchers, we pride ourselves on family and tradition, but that doesn't mean we can't expand our idea of what family really is. It isn't a matter of blood, it's about who we choose to stand with." The murmurs multiplied, some incredulous, others intrigued. As he continued, Jake felt a sense of clarity crash over him like a desert storm. He spoke of the beauty he saw in the Apache women's strength, their resilience, and their laughter that resonated through his darkest moments. With each word, he shed the layers of his upbringing that had constrained him for too long. But with his declaration came a charged silence. The weight of vulnerability settled on him. Deep within, Jake fearfully anticipated a backlash. Was he prepared for the fallout? He had sparked a fire, and the flames could either purify or burn. As he withdrew his gaze from the frowning faces to find the encouraging smile of Sophia, deep uncertainty swirled inside him, threatening to derail his newfound confidence. The town elder frowned, organizing his thoughts, and Jake braced himself for an unpleasant confrontation. "We must protect our heritage," the elder finally said, words heavy with history. "What you propose is dangerous." Jake's chest clenched. Would this be the moment that defined him? Could he stand firm against an unyielding tide? A flicker of doubt threatened to extinguish the flames of hope he had ignited. The time had come to confront not only the town but himself. Would he back down, or fight for the love he had discovered? Jake's heart thundered in his chest as he met the elder's piercing gaze, an anchor of centuries past tethered to an uncertain present. Doubt curled in his mind. What if his words were wrong? What if his voice cracked under the weight of tradition? But as he inhaled deeply, the air was rich with the scent of the earth, a reminder of the ranch he cherished, of the lineage he sought to redefine. "Dangerous?" he echoed, his own voice pushing through the constricting doubt. "Why is it dangerous to acknowledge the strength of our neighbors, to foster love where, for too long, there has only been division? We can honor our heritage while inviting others into our fold." The words spilled with a fervor he didn't know resided within him, a conviction forged in the fires of both fear and hope. The townsfolk's expressions were a tapestry of confusion and indignation. Some nodded subtly, while others looked as if he had unleashed a storm on the quiet landscape. "Expansion of family isn't about eroding what we have," Jake pressed, gesturing toward the three women who stood bright and resilient at the side. "It's about growth, embracing more paths rather than closing them off. It's about showing our children that love isn't confined but expansive." As he spoke, Sophia's gaze bore into him, pride mixed with concern saturating her expression. He recalled their conversations, the laughter that had spilled forth during quieter moments when they shared fragments of their pasts. It acted like a balm against the fractures of his entanglement with the town's brutal past. Those were memories that catalyzed something deep within him, a recognition that familial ties could be forged through shared struggle, respect, and compassion. A burly man standing at the back interrupted Jake's thoughts. "And what of our traditions, Jake? Our way of life? You think we can simply toss that aside?" The challenge felt like a slap, open and raw, yet Jake sensed an opportunity, a platform from which he could not only defend his stance, but also interrogate the very principles that had marginalized others for so long. "What if the traditions we cling to are flawed?" Jake countered, his voice thick with emotion. "What if they have served only to isolate us from those who could enrich our lives, to uphold barriers rather than build bridges?" The murmur of discontent rippled through the hall, growing louder, more insistent. The elders' brows knitted deeper, and Jake braced for a full-on confrontation. Beneath the pressure, clarity blossomed. This was not merely about him or his choices. It was about every member of the town grappling with the chains of expectation. He needed to embody the courage Sophia, Talia, and Ellen displayed daily. A momentary glance at them fueled him anew. They lived defiance without malice, strength without loud proclamations. In their presence, he imagined transformation, not just of the one who stood before them, but of everyone present, caught in this shift from fear to fortitude. With every rising voice that momentarily drowned his, the realization amplified inside him. This was not solely a battle of words, but of hearts. With resolve settling like stone in his gut, he forged ahead. "I'm not asking to erase our history, but to evolve it. This isn't about abandoning our heritage, it's about ushering in a new ideology rooted in understanding." The elders' heavy silence loomed. Behind it, doubt skimmed the surface of vulnerability, challenging Jake to press further. "What if we choose not to fight against one another but against ignorance? What if we show our children, show ourselves, that love can prevail over fear?" A palpable tension draped the room, thick and unyielding. Jake's pulse quickened with anticipation for both affirmation and resistance, accepting that he might even lose the conversation. Was the fear of backlash greener than the opportunity for understanding? He stood on the brink of possibility, the skeleton of his previous self dissolving under the weight of this moment. As the town elder finally opened his mouth to respond, every eye turned toward him, and Jake's heart raced with the electricity of what was to come. Whatever the outcome, he destined himself to play a part in weaving a future he had never dared to envision. Would his transformation and risk yield the acceptance he craved? The elder's response could reshape not only his standing in this community, but also challenge the fabric underlying their very existence. Jake took a breath, ready to face the storm that was about to unfold. The elder's voice finally broke the charged silence, ringing out with an authoritative tone that commanded immediate attention. "Jake," he began, the weight of his words echoing through the hall, "your ambition to redefine our legacy is admirable, but the danger you speak of is not something we can overlook." Jake felt a tremor in his core. The elder's words hung in the air. Every eye in the room remained fixated on their exchange, an invisible current pulling everyone into this fragile moment of reckoning. What lay before him was an inflection point, not just for himself, but for the community clinging to the familiar roots of tradition. "Change does not come easy," the elder continued, his brow deeply furrowed. "Those outside these walls view us through a lens of misunderstanding. Offering a hand may not be met with gratitude." Jake recognized the truth in those words, but rather than let them drain his resolve, they stirred something stronger within him. "I understand the risk," he declared, his voice firm. "But isn't it riskier to remain stagnant when the world around us is evolving? We owe it to our children to show them that openness can be our greatest strength." As the elder narrowed his gaze, a mixture of skepticism and curiosity flashed across his face. "You talk of loveliness and family, but what of conflict?" A lone voice from the crowd raised an objection. "Those who are different threaten the very core of who we are." In that instant, Jake saw the deep chasms of fear and resentment that ran through the townspeople. They were protectors of a fading way of life, not malefactors. They needed to confront this, wrestle with it, to truly understand what lay beneath. "Let's not confuse love with naivety," he stated, his tone steady. "It's true that stepping out of our comfort zone may invite conflict, but can we afford to continue fighting identities rather than embracing humanity? Individuals can define what it means to be part of our community, and this can only happen when we can engage in open conversations. With that statement, a spark flickered in the minds of some, evident in the subtle shifts of their expressions. Jake noticed a few hesitant nods. Change was a daunting beast, but the possibility was settling deeper. Seeds of understanding were taking root. Maybe there's a larger perspective I could be missing, he thought, grappling with the contrasting tides within the room. Them versus us, strength versus vulnerability. He had felt it within himself, the tightness of tradition at his back. Yet here, in front of this assembly, he had found an unexpected clarity. His ambition began to flourish into a resolute purpose. This was his moment to not only advocate for love but to provide tangible pathways toward it. Why not start with small steps, he suggested, his heart racing with the very implications of what he proposed. Let's organize gatherings where stories can be shared, hearts can be opened. The line of thought felt risky, but he knew he had already weathered one storm tonight. There was no stopping now. Perhaps, Sophia's voice chimed in gently, offering him solidarity. Conversations among these walls can begin to reshape our perceptions, first in small steps, then into a broader embrace of our shared humanity. The elder's ponderous scrutiny shifted slightly, and Jake could sense the atmosphere transforming. The spark ignited a flicker of hope that would not easily be extinguished. He felt the tide of possibility rising, yet he steeled himself as more voices rose in discussion, some supportive but many still hesitant. Is love truly enough to conquer the divides? Jake pondered, grappling with the weight of history and the uncertain horizon ahead. Discussions began to whirl among the townspeople, exposing raw thoughts and fears, a collective effort to navigate this new, exciting yet daunting territory. As he glanced at Talia and Ellen, their reassurance bolstering his spirits, he sensed the nascent change stretching before him, a glimmer of acknowledgement radiating from the elder, who still weighed each word on the scale of tradition. Was he prepared to confront the inevitable backlash that would surely follow? Each heartbeat echoed with an urgency. The time had come to face the very essence of his ideals. Deep-rooted fear and the potential for growth stood poised before him. And in this fragile moment, everything hung in the balance. Would they embrace the unknown together or cling to the chains of the past? The journey was only beginning, and Jake felt the call of personal discovery and relentless courage driving him forward, ready to navigate the storm on the horizon. The ensuing discussions within the hall took on a life of their own, swirling around Jake like leaves caught in a whirlwind. He stood as an anchor among the rising tide of voices, some lifted with hope, others weighed down with reluctance. Yet he found solace in the realization that his presence ignited conversation, a crucial first step towards navigating their collective fears. Questions of identity and belonging became clear as Jake listened intently. Someone mentioned the danger of losing cultural practices, while another feared the influx of outside ideas. Each perspective reflected a vulnerability that resonated with him, illuminating the complexities of deeply held beliefs. A nagging thought gripped him. To be effective, he needed to bridge these divides with empathy and understanding. Jake, you've made your point, but action requires more than just dialogue, the elder finally responded, his tone striking the delicate balance between caution and curiosity. What changes do you envision? How do you propose we maintain our authenticity while also opening our doors? Jake knew he had to answer confidently, his heart pounding like a drum. We could initiate smaller gatherings, structured discussions where everyone feels valued. What if stories were shared, dealing with our histories, like the struggles and triumphs that have shaped us? The very essence of who we are may be revealed in these narratives. The thought both excited and terrified him. Could he truly facilitate such openness? Would he be able to navigate the hearts and minds filled with resistance? Telling his own story, peeling back the layers, might just be the key to unlocking deeper connections. Talia's warm smile gave him a fleeting surge of courage, but the weight of responsibility lingered on his shoulders. He had advocates in the room, yet the potential for dissent hung in the air. Doubts trickled in. Was he equipped to lead this kind of change? And who would truly listen among those whose lives were steeped in tradition? As voices shifted to discuss the logistics, Jake stood slightly apart, his mind racing. He envisioned how these gatherings might unfold, their conversations interwoven like threads knitting a patchwork of insight. But images of inevitable backlash danced in his mind, a reminder of every barrier constructed over generations, whispering that discomfort would follow any attempt to stray into uncharted territory. Soon after, the hall quieted once again, allowing Jake the moment to project his next thoughts with conviction. Change requires patience and trust. We must be willing to venture into discomfort. Perhaps we should implement a trial period for these gatherings. No one could manipulate or micromanage us if we took ownership of our stories. With that, he locked eyes with the elder, hoping for understanding. Would the elder see Jake's vision as a path toward both preservation and evolution? Before uncertainty could settle in, the elder nodded, although his expression remained cautious. "I will not inhibit your desires, Jake," the elder stated slowly, "but know that the risk you propose affects us all. Are you truly prepared for the challenges that lie ahead? The pushback might be fierce, and not all will share your enthusiasm." Jake inhaled deeply, the air thickening with the weight of reality. This was it, his moment to discern if he had the strength to withstand potential backlash while remaining true to his mission. "I know there may be backlash," he replied quietly, feeling the gravity of his decision. "But if we do not take this risk, we may never uncover the true essence of our community. I trust that we can withstand the push and pull of change." He sensed some in the crowd shift in their seats. A mix of unrest and curiosity mingled with intrigue. The faint nods of agreement from a few familiar faces encouraged him, as he navigated the intricate landscape of hearts and minds laid bare before him. The discussion quickly transformed into a plan, an evolving blueprint full of uncertainty. However, his focus sharpened. A realization emerged. The growth of the community depended not just on external acceptance, but also on internal fortitude, on confronting shared histories in a manner that was genuine and unguarded. As the day drew to a close, he found himself wondering if he truly was prepared for the inevitable tides of conflict. Would he be able to hold the threads together as the first gatherings approached? And what would arise from those stories shared under the weight of such tradition? Facing these questions weighed heavy on him, igniting a flicker of anxiety buried deep within. He navigated an uncharted path, one that promised discovery, but also exposed wounds long hidden. Each choice he made from this moment forward would not only sculpt his journey, but also define the possibilities for his community. The uncertainty was palpable, a tension rising like smoke in the air. A new challenge awaited, to stand resolutely at the intersection of progress and preservation, which would ultimately test the very core of who he was. Would he be able to rise to the occasion, confront the shadows of fear, and lead by example? The moment of truth was approaching, and with it he felt the surge of urgency to define his legacy as both a leader and a bridge between what was and what could be. Jake stepped away from the hall, the chatter still buzzing in his mind, a blend of hope, trepidation, and bewildered potential. He wandered outside, where the fresh air lifted some of the weight from his shoulders, but the questions pursed firmly in his thoughts refused to dissipate. What would he uncover about himself through this journey? He needed to dig deeper, not just for the sake of others but also for his own personal development. Sitting on a weathered bench under an old oak tree, he closed his eyes and envisioned the narrative he so earnestly hoped to cultivate. He had suggested gathering stories, but would he have the courage to share his own? To peel back the hard shell and expose the vulnerabilities within? The thought clenched in his chest, setting off a wave of self-doubt that crashed violently against the shores of his confidence. But amid this chaos was another feeling, a burgeoning resolve. He recalled Talia's encouragement, her belief in his ability to foster connection. If he faltered, the chance to establish an understanding and a bridge between the past and present might collapse. The fear of failure was paralyzing, but in that moment on the bench, Jake made a decision. He would let his story unfold in tandem with those of others. He couldn't expect others to be vulnerable if he wasn't willing to take that step himself. The sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the ground, mimicking the sense of unease that clouded his thoughts. What experiences had shaped him, and would he have the courage to share them transparently? His upbringing had often pushed him to remain stoic, to hide behind the shield of masculinity. Now that learned posture was his own most profound adversary. As he rose from the bench and started walking, a flicker of insight struck him. True authenticity required him to address his own defensiveness and fears. It had always been easier to navigate the battlefield outside than to confront what resided in his heart. Each ounce of doubt he felt was intertwined with the burdens of past decisions and ingrained habits that no longer served him. Could he articulate these struggles with compassion rather than shame? In the days that followed, the urgency to prepare for the gathering grew ever more tangible. Though he felt the tide of anticipation surging, he also felt the ripples of fear gnawing at him, especially as the returns of his thoughts twisted into spirals of what-ifs. Carmen, a friend from his childhood, invited him to a local coffee shop to act as a sounding board, unwittingly providing him a safe space to explore and articulate his evolving ideas. Over cups of steaming coffee, Jake found himself spilling fragments of his past into the conversation. He spoke of moments that had shattered him, and revelations that had rebuilt his identity. Carmen's patient nods and engaged questions made it evident that sharing could carve a path toward understanding, not just for others, but for himself. "I think you're afraid," she said suddenly, her voice steady but kind. "Afraid you won't be heard, or won't measure up to the weight of what people expect from you." Jake felt the heat rise to his face, the truth cut cleanly through the haze of his self-doubt. "How can I lead them if I don't even know how to lead myself?" he confessed. Carmen leaned in closer, holding her gaze steady with his. "You're already leading by being willing to confront that fear. You just have to trust that vulnerability will resonate." He left the cafe with a renewed sense of purpose, his identity no longer solely defined by duty and expectations. The foundation for change began, and as he envisioned the first gathering, he felt a glimmer of assurance. He could offer something genuine, his own struggles, shaped into a narrative that would invite others to share theirs. However, deep within him still lingered the nagging question, what would he do when the feedback wasn't positive? How would he balance his drive for connection and openness with the very real possibility of his ideas being dismissed or misunderstood? The path he tread was still fraught with challenges, and the moment of reckoning was fast approaching, his first attempt to weave a narrative tapestry. As he stood outside, staring at the horizon painted in shades of twilight, a fierce determination ignited within. The moment to confront the silence surrounding his struggles was now closer than ever. Would he find his voice among dissenting opinions? Or would the shadows of the past silence him yet again? His journey toward unearthing both his and his community's authenticity was only just beginning. The days dwindled, and as Jake prepared for the gathering, a familiar friend began to take residence in his mind. Fear. Every time he envisioned the room full of expectant faces, anticipation warred with anxiety. What if his story fell flat? What if it failed to resonate? Resting with these thoughts was a daily occurrence, and despite Carmen's supportive insights, the gnawing dread lurked just beneath the surface. He spent his evenings scribbling notes, fragments of thoughts and feelings tumbling onto the pages. Each word came like a drop of water, carving deeper into the stone of his indecision. He sought clarity, but clarity seemed to retreat at the slightest hint of judgment. Nights turned into a mix of sleepless pondering and fleeting resolve, and he often found himself venturing back to that weathered bench beneath the oak tree, as if the roots of nature could anchor his thoughts. On one particular evening, as twilight surrendered to darkness, Jake had a revelation. He wasn't merely battling external expectations, he was engaging in a war with a version of himself that shackled him with outdated beliefs. The restraint from expressing his vulnerabilities had been a form of self-imposed exile. He recognized how much he had suppressed the very stories that could liberate him. But the question remained, was he prepared to face that liberation due to the fear that had long ruled his mind? Practice, he murmured to himself, and so he began. Standing alone in his simple living room, he looked into the mirror, willing to confront not only his reflection but the weight of uncertainty in his voice. What started as hesitant whispers morphed into energetic oration as he rehearsed his narrative, his personal truths laden with anguish, resilience, and hope. Each pronounced word brought with it shivers of both dread and exhilaration. It was transformative. He was accessing an emotional reservoir of experiences long buried beneath layers of stoicism. He spoke of his family's struggles and the moments that had instilled both fear and hope within him. Yet each rehearsal revealed a raw wound, reminding him of how painful but necessary it was to unearth these feelings. The following days unfolded with an oscillation of confidence and doubt, driving him to seek out those in his community who might listen. He approached old friends and acquaintances, asking for their ears and insights. Conversations revealed unexpected wisdom, and each individual's narrative offered him further fuel, but also a clarion call to embrace his own. He felt empowered yet stripped bare. Open dialogue with others illuminated paths to his own storytelling. As he extended his reach, he was confronted once again with skepticism, not from the outside but internally. "What if I'm not good enough?" echoed through his mind continuously. The very voice that had kept him cocooned in silence now challenged his desire for connection. Yet the deeper he traveled into his narrative, the more he recognized the bittersweet truth. Imperfections were not barriers, but invitations to authenticity. On a particularly restless night before the gathering, he sat in his dimly lit kitchen. A sudden thought pierced the haze of uncertainty. The stakes were high. This moment could define his development, but it was also a leap into the unknown. What if the narrative he had crafted held the power to uplift others, just as it was beginning to uplift himself? Suddenly struck with clarity, he understood that the feedback mattered less than the courage it took to offer his truth. The time had come, not just to confront the expectations of others, but to reconcile his personal fears and inadequacies. Embracing the uncertainty ahead, he committed himself fully to his purpose. Life as he knew it would transform that evening. The gathering wasn't merely a platform for stories, it was a crucible for growth, both for himself and potentially for those who stood ready to listen. But as the day dawned, another reality weighed heavily on his heart. What if the stories of his past collided violently with a present that demanded acceptance? What if the openness he craved elicited judgment rather than empathy? It was time to find out. Jake was standing on the threshold of something immeasurable, and the real question looming was whether he would step through the door or step back into the shadows. As the sun dipped beneath the horizon, Jake found himself sitting in front of the gathering space, the wooden structure exuding a warm glow under the string lights that twinkled like stars against the backdrop of uncertainty. The air was thick with the intoxicating blend of anticipation and self-doubt. Each guest arriving reinforced the moment's gravity, amplifying the whisper of fear that lingered in the corners of his mind, a specter threatening to overshadow the evening's purpose. Pacing nervously, Jake almost wished he could bottle up the tumult within him, an amalgamation of excitement, vulnerability, and the nagging question that had plagued him for days. What would happen if his story didn't resonate? But as he watched friends, strangers, and familiar faces trickle in, he felt an unexpected charge of urgency. They were there, drawn by the promise of stories shared, just as he had once yearned for connection. With a deep breath, he recalled the fragments of conversation he had had in the previous days, their tales of struggle and triumph, each thread weaving into the tapestry of his own narrative. The realization struck him again. They were cruising through their own storms, just as he was. Yet, numerous possibilities loomed ahead, each path shadowed by the potential for misunderstanding or rejection. Slipping into the inner realm of his thoughts, he consciously pushed back against the waves of self-criticism. Imperfection was indeed an integral part of their human experience. What mattered was not the flawless delivery of his story, but the authenticity that lay behind each word. Jake found himself caught in the paradox of needing approval while simultaneously striving for authenticity. The contradiction gnawed at him, as he remembered being praised for his resilience, but never fully feeling that he had earned it. What if they see through the facade? His inner voice challenged, igniting both fear and resolve. As he stood alongside the gathering, watching laughter ripple through the crowd, something shifted within him. A quiet understanding began to blossom, a recognition that vulnerability was a strength. These were not merely blank faces. They were potential allies in vulnerability, each capable of reflecting pieces of his own journey. With every tick of the clock, he weighed his decision. Would he share the truth of his past, the very essence that shaped who he was today? The decision felt monumental in that moment, yet he knew that stifling it would cost him dearly. There it was, the opportunity not only to connect with others, but also to liberate himself from his own chains. When he took the stage, the eyes of the audience met his like a soft embrace, and for a fleeting moment, time stood still. He could either freeze in the spotlight or let the words flow. It was as if he had reached a crossroads in his soul, each junction representing the fears he harbored versus the freedom he sought. He chose freedom. As he recounted the fragments of his life, the moments intertwined with joy and sorrow, Jake watched their shifting expressions, a rapt audience absorbing every vulnerable detail. The story unfolded, messy and raw, but it began to resonate, his truth casting ripples across their faces. There was laughter, there were sighs, but just as he felt the warmth of connection, a familiar voice emerged from the shadows, igniting a flicker of dread. "So, what makes you think your story matters?" A piercing challenge filled the air, drawing eyes toward the back of the room. There stood the very embodiment of his internal critiques, a figure from his past, questioning the validity of his journey. Jake's heart raced. It wasn't just criticism, it was the resurrection of his old insecurities. How would he respond? Would he collapse under the pressure of judgment, or could he rise to defend the story that had cost him so much to forge? In that moment, the stakes elevated, his response not only a reflection of his growth, but pivotal in shaping the evening's direction. It was time to confront the specter that haunted him, to make a choice that would either cement his progress or push him back into the shadows. The challenge had been issued. How would he navigate this confrontation? And more importantly, what would it reveal about his journey ahead? Jake felt time distort as he stood at the edge of his decision, adrenaline surging through his veins. His heart matched the rhythm of doubt whispering in his mind, the familiar taunt of inadequacy bubbling to the surface. What if they're right? He locked eyes with the figure in the shadows, a ghost from his past that represented a barrage of self-questioning. He took a breath, tightly gripping the podium, the wood cool beneath his fingers. The audience shifted. The weight of anticipation hung heavy, their hope placed squarely on his shoulders. "Why does my story matter?" he echoed the voice, channeling the challenge back. It was a question that had plagued him for too long, much like the person standing in front of him. "This journey isn't just about me, it's about all of you," he continued, fueled by an unexpected burst of clarity. The vulnerability that had once felt terrifying now seemed like a shield. He lifted his chin, steadying his voice. Each word was punctuated by the sincerity of his soul. "We all carry burdens, we all bear scars, and we each have stories that shape our existence. What matters isn't the perfection of those stories, but the courage to share them, to connect." He felt the air shift. Murmurs of agreement echoed in the room. The audience leaned forward, intrigued. Perhaps they too had wrestled with the same specters he faced, the feeling of worthlessness, the pressure to be flawless. His past didn't diminish him, it enriched his present. Somewhere deep inside, a flicker of pride ignited, refusing to be snuffed out. How often had he diminished himself, apologizing for experiences that were rightfully his? The back of the room remained shadowy, yet he focused intently on the glimmers of understanding in the front rows. "You see, every moment, every setback or triumph has carved a piece of who I am. I am not a failure, nor am I defined by the doubts of others." The figure's expression shifted, uncertainty lining their features as if they too were grappling with the realization of their own influence over his life. For the first time in years, Jake felt a sense of autonomy. Nobody else could dictate his worth. The more he spoke, the more liberated he became, lifting the weight of expectation from his shoulders. A rush of momentum coursed through him, his voice growing steadier, urgency swelling within his words. "So let's embrace the messiness of our lives. Let's share our fears and inspire each other to rise." The resonance of his declaration echoed within him, a mantra to counter his old insecurities. Each applause, each nod from his audience fueled his determination. As he concluded, he opened himself to critique once more, a choice separate from the voice that haunted him. "So I ask you, community, share with me your stories, your truths. Let's expose the rawness together." He stepped down from the stage, adrenaline still surging, electric. Just as applause erupted, a sense of accomplishment swept through him. He had faced the profound critique from his past, and in doing so, forged a new understanding of himself, one built on discovery rather than frailty. But as he navigated back through the crowd, congratulations and gratitude washing over him, his eyes drifted back toward the figure who had once planted seeds of doubt. That figure, standing in stark contrast to the warmth surrounding him, now seemed a catalyst for a different kind of challenge. Could he confront them not with anger, but with understanding? The journey had only just begun, and Jake knew deep down that the confrontation was not over. Each step he took echoed with resolve, urging him toward an uncertain yet promising path. What lay ahead had the potential to reshape his understanding of worth and connection, but would he have the courage to continue facing the shadows of his past? Jake leaned back against the well-worn wood of the barn, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the dusty ground. The gathering had transformed him. He could feel the weight of doubt lifting from his shoulders. Like a burden he no longer needed to carry, the applause still rang in his ears, a tangible acknowledgement of the journey he had embarked upon, not just for himself, but for the relationships he had nurtured with Sophia, Talia, and Elaine. The months that followed were a cascade of growth and transformation. The gatherings evolved into a safe haven where stories flowed freely, each resonance deepening the ties among the community. These interactions pressed against the boundaries of tradition, challenging rigid narratives while weaving new ones that included the vibrant histories of the Apache women who stood steadfast at his side. Jake no longer felt tethered solely to the legacy of his father's ranch. Instead, he became a steward of stories, collectively enriching his community's identity. Each evening spent under the stretched canvas of the sky, surrounded by the laughter of his friends, had birthed a renewed sense of purpose. They built bridges where walls once stood, facing both acceptance and anger, with the resolve to create a future defined by unity. Recognition came gradually yet powerfully. Town meetings that had once ignited tension became collaborative forums where perspectives intermingled amid laughter and understanding. The elder, once skeptical, stood beside Jake one evening, nodding in agreement as they outlined plans for future events that welcomed all, something the townsfolk had never seen. It was a moment of triumph, and whispers of change began to ripple through the community. Jake had conquered more than just the critique thrown at him that night. He emerged comfortable in his sense of identity, no longer defined by his past, but instead by his courage to advocate for inclusivity. His connection to the land and its legacy blossomed anew, infusing vigor into the ranch he had feared losing. He stepped into the barn, now brighter with new memories than it ever had been under shadows of despair. The dust no longer felt oppressive. It danced in the air as Jake repaired long-neglected structures, channeling his newfound confidence into visible growth. The ranch was a reflection of his personal achievement, revival sparked by resilience. Undoubtedly, the path continued to twist with challenges. On one occasion, a former acquaintance questioned his motives, attempting to undermine the progress he had made. Instead of crumbling, Jake faced them with confidence, articulating a vision rooted in love rather than resistance. It was a defining moment of clarity, assured in his journey, which had shifted from battling prejudices to fostering understanding. His relationships with Sophia, Talia, and Ellen deepened beyond romantic attachments into profound partnerships. They exchanged cultural insights, each teaching the other resilience, strength, and hope. They became co-architects of a future where differences were valued rather than vilified. Each day with them was a testament to the power of love conquering fear, something Jake had once deemed impossible in a town steeped in traditions. Jake now stood before the community, not swayed by the shadows of his past, but radiating strength born from his journey. Self-acceptance aligned with collaborative effort emerged as his true achievements. He had not only reclaimed his identity, but had also redefined the legacy of his ranch, establishing it as a hub for healing and connection. Finally, one evening as he looked out at the sprawling landscape, the colors of sunset spilling across the sky felt different. They were not mere hues of fading light, but a canvas of unlimited possibilities. He felt a profound sense of settling within. He had accomplished what he had set out to do. He was not just a rancher wrestling with the weight of history. He was an embodiment of transformation, a voice that stood firmly in the turbulent currents of life. This journey, one forged in fire and light, was not just for him, but for all those who dared to dream beyond their fears. The laughter that once startled him now came as a chorus of hope and renewal. As he breathed in the cool evening air, Jake understood that true fulfillment lay not in judgment, but in collective elevation. It was time for the world to know, and for everyone to embrace the courage that connects all humans. You need to subscribe now to witness more incredible stories that reshape lives. This is the moment to show your support. Leave a like now to energize our community. Comment below with your thoughts, reactions, or theories about Jake's journey. It matters deeply. Don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to hear these transformative tales. Your voice can spark change.